Actually, one of the most important things is the fact that it needs to be fast. I mean, from the moment the client sends the request until it gets the response, it needs to be fast. And by fast, I mean hundreds of milliseconds is on the edge, let's say. It should be 200, 300 milliseconds is the perfect timing. It's not an issue for most of the applications, because usually we just need to retrieve some object from database, serialize it, and send it back. It's usually a matter of, I don't know, 80 to 100 milliseconds. It's not an issue, but sometimes it can be an issue because we need to make some complicated computations. We have to parse some data or perform any other thing that will just take some time. Maybe we need to access some external server. So we get a request from a user and we need to send a different request to some other API, I don't know, to retrieve some data from Google Maps API or whatever. It can take some time. And if by any chance the response of the request doesn't actually have to include the actual data for that is the result of our computations, this is a perfect place to use a task queue. And our task queue that we are using is called Celery. And we actually have a perfect example of a good place to use a task queue. It's the ultra-wideband project that we have. So what happens in this project is that the beacons, there are those distances being measured, and then the base station is sending this measured distances to the server. And based on those distances, the server has to compute the location of the beacon. But the base station that is sending this request to us is not really interested in where this beacon is located. All it has to do is send us those data and just receive a confirmation that we got it, we saved it, and it can already forget about it and move on. It's not really interested where this beacon is actually located. The response where the beacon is located is someone else is interested in that, and it may be a different front-end client or whatever. And this is a perfect place to use task queue. So what actually happens is the request is being put into the queue after some initial pre-processing, and is being put into the queue, and the client that sent this request is just getting some generic answer that okay, everything went okay, and then this computation is being performed asynchronously in a different process. So over here we have a snippet of code that is taken from this ultra-wideband project. So this is an endpoint that is being called by this base stations. They are sending us some measurements in the request data. I just deleted this part because it doesn't matter what we are actually doing with those measurements. The important part is the line 173. So over here we are kind of calling the perform prediction function, but we're not calling it directly. We're calling it with .delay, and then we are giving it some parameter. And we are not waiting for anything over here. This line is being passed on instantaneously, even if perform prediction would take, I don't know, 5-10 minutes to perform computation. It doesn't matter for this function. All it does, it just schedules this function to be performed, and then it sends the response. And what is happening in the perform prediction function? And actually, the function is pretty straightforward. It just takes the parameter, checks some initial things, and then just performs the prediction and saves it to database. actually the keyword is this decorator at shared task. It actually tells the Celery application that this is a task that is being performed asynchronously. And as I already spoke earlier, this is where Redis comes into play. So what actually happens on a low level is when this line of code is being executed, Django saves an entry into the Redis that this function needs to be called, and it needs to get this parameter, and that's it. That's all that happens on the Django part. And then Celery, which is a different process, just looks through this Redis database continuously, and when it notices an entry like this, it just takes this entry, deletes it, and performs the function and gives those parameters to the function. So this is actually something that we use, maybe not that very often, but it has its applications. So this sums up the backend part. So now we actually have to create some frontend. For the front-end application, we almost always use Vue Js for the front-end, web front-end, I mean, because front-end is a very generic word, and a front-end may also be a mobile application, for example. So for a web front-end, we almost always use Vue Js, which is a reactive JavaScript single-page application framework. A lot of names over here. What does it actually mean? Reactive is the whole concept of Vue.js is based around the fact that data is well reactive, as the name implies. What it means is that every variable you have in the scope of the application has so-called observers. So if I have a variable counter and I initialize it to 0, and then anywhere in the code I will just add 1 to this counter, then all the pieces of the software that rely on this on the value of the counter are automatically notified that there was a change over here, and you should react to this change. So this is why it's called a reactive framework. And it's called a single page application framework because it's meant to, we are not always using it that way, and why is I'm going to explain in a moment, but it's meant to be a single page application. So when you open the page in your browser, it actually only loads once, and then all the transitions, all the clicks you make, and the steps inside the application, they are kind of virtual, and they are not actually triggering any requests to the server besides the API access that we already spoke about. What is also important, Vue.js is pretty simple. If you've built any web page using basic technologies, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, you already know how to create Vue.js application. There is no custom ideas like in React. This JSX concept in React is it's strange, at least for me. I tried to look at it, and it's not that clear how it all works. Vue.js builds on top of well-known standards, and this is why it's, in my opinion, it's much more easier to learn. It's pretty lightweight. It has many different pieces responsible for all the things. For example, there is a very complex animation/transition part of Vue.js that you can easily create some transitions and animations between the states. But if you're not using it, the compiler actually takes out this part of the code, so it doesn't pollute your end build. And it's quite mature. It's been around for over 8 years and has many plugins that we are also actually using if it makes sense for us. So right now, just a few slides with snippets of code that how this Vue.js applications are built. So this is more or less how the very simple Vue.js page may look like. And there are two main parts over here. The top part is the HTML part, is what is actually being rendered inside the browser, and the bottom part is the JavaScript part. Is the actually in the line 20 you can see a keyword new Vue. So over here a Vue instance is being created, and what is the most important part in this snippet of code is how those two pieces know about each other. This is actually over here. So the HTML part needs to be given some ID. Usually it's app. And then when we create a Vue instance, we have to tell the Vue instance where it should mount itself. And we do it with a simple CSS selector hash app. So it actually means that this Vue instance is being binded over this HTML element. So this is the most important part over here. So let's just see, is this snippet also blurred on your screen, or is it just my screen? Is it readable for you guys?
Yes. For me, it's readable, yes.
Okay, so it looks blurred on my screen, but okay, it's the most important part that it's readable for you. So over here we have a basic Vue object, sorry, not object, it's a Vue instance structure. And there are some parts that we have to bear in mind. So actually we already spoke about this L part, which is how the Vue object knows where it should bind itself. The next part that is important, and it's actually, it's not very usually used in Vue.js itself, but it's very important when we use Vue.js alongside Django, is we have to change the delimiters. The delimiters are just some characters that Vue.js recognizes and knows that what is written inside those delimiters are some directives that are meant for Vue.js to parse. And the default delimiters are two, I don't know what's two brackets, yeah, those brackets, and they're twice. So this is the default delimiter. The problem is that it's also a default delimiter for Django. And this is why we have to change the default delimiter for Vue.js so that they don't collide with each other, because otherwise it would be a mess, because both frameworks would try to actually access the data inside those delimiters, and the result would be very unpredictable. So what we usually use for a delimiter is $sign preceded with a single bracket. So this is the first thing that we have to bear in mind. The second part is the data. This is actually the source of, I'm not going to say all of the data, but most of the data that this Vue instance is going to use. You can see that we are creating an object over here. It's almost always an object. I don't know if I have ever seen data not being an object, because usually you have to have a lot of variables accessible to the instance. So an object is an obvious choice to store all of them. So over here we have a loader, which is a Boolean flag, and then we have an object that is an object, and it has two fields, name and description. And just a sneak peek how we can actually use this data. We have a snippet of the code that from the previous slide, how the HTML is defined for this page. And over here, you can see that the loader is being passed into the loader component as an attribute show. And this is a one-way passing, let's say. So the loader component gets the value of the loader variable, but it cannot do anything with it. But there can also be a so-called two-way data binding. So we can also pass the data to the component in a way that the component can modify this data. So the changes are visible to us. And this is actually represented in line 11 and 12. So we have an input component that gets an object name, and it renders, well, an input field. And when the user changes the value in this field, the change that the user actually performed is being instantaneously reflected in the object over here. And if any data relies on the value of this object, it can see those changes instantaneously. So this is the yellow line is just a passing of the variable, and the red line, the red arrow, shows a two-way data binding between a component and its parent. So the next part are the methods. Over here we have one method that is called save, but usually there may be a lot of methods in a Vue instance. The methods are also meant to be, the methods can be accessed in, let's say, three ways. One of the ways is what you can see over here, that we have a button, and the @click means that when the button is being clicked, we are calling the save method. So when the user clicks this button, this method will be called. The methods can also be called from each other. So if we were to have a different method over here that would be, I don't know, called update, it could perform some actions and then call the save method. And the third way the methods can be called are from the parent component. So when we had over here, for example, the input component, if the parent for some reason would like to perform some low level action on a child, the parent can actually call some methods of the child. But that's not really important right now. Next part is watch, and this is where the reactive part of the Vue.js comes into play. So we can create some, let's say, callbacks that when the value of the variable changes, some code will be executed. And this is what watch is for. So over here, we have a watch, and we are watching a variable called ID. And there can be two ways to create a watch. ID could directly be a function. So over here, we could directly have a function. Or if we need some different settings than the default ones, then the ID is an object. We create we set up all the options we want. So over here, we're setting the immediate option to true. I think it's out of scope of this telco to tell all the options right now, but let's just bear in mind that there are some options that can be set, and then we have a handler that is being actually called when the value of the ID changes. Then last part of the code is the computed option. So what it actually does is we are the part of the code that you can see over here is our own construct of how we are binding Vue.js with Django, and I will come back to it in just a few slides. So let's not focus on this, but what you need to know about computed is that you can have some variable that is being computed on the fly. If, for example, on a page you need to have in 5 places a result of I don't know, some long computation that okay, for example, you have a list of an items and you need to know how many items in the list are I don't know, older than 5 days. Obviously, you can calculate it in every place. You need this information by hand, but the best way is to create a computed variable that will compute this value, return it, and all the pieces of the software can access this value freely. So this is the basic structure of the Vue instance, and just a sneak. Now a fast peek into how we are actually binding Vue.js and Django together, because this is something that we have been working on for quite some time because it wasn't that easy. So there were a few things to consider, and the result that we came up with is that we have a front-end application inside Django registered, and the sole purpose of this front-end application is rendering templates, Vue.js templates. So over here you can see Vue's user.py script that defines an edit function, and all this edit function does, it's rendering a template that is called user/edit.html, and then it doesn't have to, but it can pass some data to this template. So actually over here, it's passing an ID and a Boolean flag new. So right now, let's take a look at how this maps to the Vue.js. So the name of the template directly reflects the file that we are looking at. So we have a directory called templates. Then, as you can see over here, we have user/edit, and then we have user/edit. So this is the file that is going to be served to the user. And then if there were any parameters, as in we have over here an ID parameter and new parameter, this is where we can come back to this computed part that I've shown you before. This is our workaround around the integration of the Vue.js and Django. What we are doing is we are creating a computed variable. We are passing the parameter, so this parameter is going to be passed over here, and you can see the double brackets I've spoken about earlier. Then we can have some kind of preparation of parsing of this data. So if this ID would be none, we are returning undefined. This is just to feel the differences between Python and JavaScript. So this variable would be reliable in the code in all the scenarios. And the result is that when any part of this Vue instance will access the ID variable, what it will get is actually this parameter. So this is how we are passing parameters from Vue.js to Django. The same applies to the isNew variable, which is being mapped from the new parameter from Django. So this is how we are mapping parameters from Django into the Vue.js, but it's not the end. As you can see over here, there are some keywords, extends and block. what they actually do, they are actually not Vue.js parts of the code. They are Django specific because Django uses a template engine to render the front end. So what it actually means is that when we have extend template.html, it actually means that on top of this file, there will be a template.html file loaded. So we are looking into the templates directory, and we are looking into the template.html file. And this is what is actually going to be loaded. As you can see, this file is actually responsible for creating a sidebar in our application. So our application consists of two parts. There is a sidebar on the left part, and then there is actually the whole page on the right. And this is what the template is creating. And there also needs to be some kind of pointer as to the template where actually all this code should be put in. And this is where the block keyword comes into play, because over here we are implementing a block called container. So what actually you can see is that there is a block called container over here. It's empty because it needs to be filled with the data over here. So what actually happens is that all this is going to be put over here, and this is what is going to be rendered to the user. But why stop over here? We must go deeper. So what actually you can notice is the fact that this template is also extending some other template. There is also a block content and so on. So what you would expect right now is that in the templates folder directory, there would be a base.html file that would contain a content block. So, well, yes, but not really. This is where we have a different trick in our sleeve. So, what actually happens is the block is actually implemented in a normal way. There is the block content inside the base template. But the file you're looking at is not actually templates/base.html. It's actually located in a very different directory, frontend_src, and its name is very different from base.html. And why is that? The answer to the question is not that simple, because well, the Vue.js application has some dependencies. There may be quite a few JavaScript libraries. They can be some custom CSS or SAS files required. There can be some assets. It's not meant to be served directly. There needs to be. It's not actually a compiler, but it's a bundler. We need to bundle the Vue.js application inside the file, and this file needs to be accessible for a browser. So this is why we have this kind of structure. Over here, you can see some directories. There are 4 loops over here, one for CSS files and one for JavaScript files. And actually, those lines of code, this one and this one, is going to be replaced in a for loop with bundled JS and CSS files. And who will do it? It's a responsibility of a Webpack. This is a front-end building application, not actually building, as I already said, but bundling. Webpack is responsible for bundling our application. So we are starting with, I don't know, our usual project may consist of 100, 200 front-end files, and this can be some front-end libraries, some custom components, translation files, CSS files, images, and so on and so on. And it bundles those files together so they are easier to maintain and easier to serve. It also minifies them on fly, so they are lighter to be sent to the end user. Over here, you can just see a small snippet of the code of the configuration of the Webpack that we are using. So Webpack builds around plugins. And so we have one of the plugins that is responsible for creating this base HTML file that we were looking for. So we are giving it this template, the weird name template. And when it injects all the data inside, it's being copied into the base.html file. So this is how this topmost template is being created in our project. So that would be more or less everything about the front end. And the last piece of the software that we would like to tell you about is Draw.io. This is a schematics drawing tool. It's both online and offline. And we are mostly using it to create database diagrams. This is something that is maybe not really required for all the applications, but when the application gets complex enough, it's much more easier to understand all the dependencies inside the project when you look at the database diagram. So it's almost always a good idea to create a database diagram when creating an application, but this is just a small addition. So yeah, any questions to the part about front end, or actually to the whole presentation, because this is it from our side.
Yes, we would like to see something live, you know.
Yes, definitely, but it's not. You can see that we have like 14 people on this meeting, and 2 of you are interested in seeing some code live. So this will happen on a different meeting, only for you guys, because let's not waste everybody's time.
Yes, and as we said before, we plan to just sit down with our computers over the code and have some live sessions. Probably not single one, because there's much more, and that live session will for sure take a lot more time than just a presentation. So it will be probably like 2 or 3 maybe sessions with the code, and definitely we need live also presentation. Well, it won't be presentation per se, but it will be just going through the code and showing you guys how it really works and how it reacts to several changes, and to what we do to the code, and what can be changed, and where to look for certain things in the code, because this is the most important thing, because our projects consist of probably hundreds of files. So it's also extremely important to know where to look for certain things in project.
Serhi, to answer your question, yeah, I mean, it depends. This is usually the correct answer to all of the questions. So the client and the server are coupled if we are using this kind of parameters passing. We do it often, but not always. If there is this parameter passing, then in the Vue Js part, you will have those kinds of strings that are meant to be replaced by Django template. And obviously, if you were to use this Vue Js frontend without Django, well, those strings won't get replaced with proper data, and the Vue Js application will probably not work correctly. So in this matter, they are coupled together, yes.
I'd rather use the word stitched.
Yes, we are using Axios for HTTP requests on the front end, yes. This is actually how we retrieve like 99.99999% of the data. If we are using this kind of parameters passing, they are always very simple parameters. Like in this example, it can be an ID or a Boolean flag. We are never going to use this kind of parameters passing to actually pass some complex objects or anything. If this object, if this Vue.js instance would actually require an object from the database, what would actually happen is that we would pass this ID, it would get parsed over here, and I think this is exactly what was happening over here. Yes, so actually you have it presented over here. So over here we have an ID being passed from Django. It's being parsed to the format that is understandable by Vue.js, and then we have a watch on this ID. So when the value of this ID changes, we are firing up a loader, and we are using Axios to get the data from the server, and we are getting the data using this this ID parameter that we got from the Django backend, and then we are obviously turning off the loader. So this is actually how we are getting the data to the front end from the backend. Any further questions?
Okay, so if someone has some questions about this presentation, you can easily ask us every time without weekends, maybe. But we also plan to make another presentations of different parts, because this is a bunch of technologies that we are using from some projects. Some projects are different, so with another technologies, and we try to present it in another presentation for Serhi and Kuba. And there's a starter point for as Claudius mentioned, some coding sessions on a project like Shadowcat or something else.
Yeah. We hope that presentation would stay on the disk as a sort of README file for you guys. So I mean mostly Kuba and Serhi as a software developers, but also for any other of you guys who just want to refer to it in the future. So it would be really nice if we had some feedback from you. What is or what would you like to add to it or clarify? Probably, maybe go into some more details. We can, of course, edit this presentation, clarify it, change it, and as I said, and leave it on the files on the Teams files. Just for you to look at it in the future, not only
it's actually already available on Teams files. Mm-hmm. General szkolenia IT. This presentation is already available, and with Adam's help, then if Adam helps me, then I can also upload the recording of this meeting later on.
Mm-hmm. So not exactly now at that moment, but if you will have any suggestions, just send us an email or on WhatsApp or whatever in next days. Just go through this presentation by yourselves and look at this and think about what would you like to see in it more. Okay.
Okay, great.
Okay. For now, for us, it's final, yeah. Presentation. Yeah. Okay. So have a nice weekend for